All right, for this first question, it says find sine, cosine, and tangent ratios for angle z. So the word ratio just means fraction. So we don't actually want to find the angle measure for angle z. We just want to set up our SOHCAHTOA. So just to remind you, sine opposite over hypotenuse, cosine adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent opposite over adjacent. So if we're looking at angle z here, the opposite is across the triangle from that, so that would be where you see the 4 radical 3. The adjacent attached to the angle, but not the hypotenuse, is going to be where we see the 4, and the hypotenuse doesn't change no matter which angle you're looking at. That's always going to be the longest side in the triangle. And the hypotenuse can always be found across from the right angle in a right triangle. So we're just going to set these up. Okay, so for my sine, I'm going to have opposite over hypotenuse. And before I write it on the line here, most of these are going to be able to be something that we can simplify. So the sine of z here, 4 radical 3, is the opposite. 8's the hypotenuse. Now, in this situation, you don't want to touch the radical, but right there, if I can reduce 4 over 8, I am allowed to do that. So 4 over 8 would be a half. So this could be 1/2, and then that radical 3. Now, the actual way I would write that, you wouldn't see the 1 written in front, so it's going to be square root of 3 over 2 for our sine ratio there. All right, for your cosine, that's adjacent over hypotenuse, so that ratio would be 4 over 8. And then, again, in that situation, I can reduce that. So this is actually going to reduce to 1/2. And then our tangent is opposite over adjacent. So the opposite is the 4 radical 3. Adjacent is the 4. And this one will also reduce. The 4's can get canceled out there. So this is actually just the square root of 3 if we simplify it. All right, now we are going to find a missing side length here. So look at the angle that you have and then identify what you have in the problem. 11 is attached to that, so that's going to be adjacent. X is going to be the hypotenuse there. I don't have a label on the third side, so I got to work with what I've got. Adjacent hypotenuse, if you look back up here, that's going to go with cosine. So cosine of our angle measure here is going to be equal to 11 over x. So adjacent goes over the hypotenuse. Now, if you guys have the variable in the denominator, what happens? These guys trade places. And so what I would type into my calculator is 11 divided by the cosine of 28. All right, for number 3 here, I got a 40-degree angle. B here is opposite that angle. 9 here is adjacent to that angle. Opposite adjacent, you can actually see my little note up here, is going to be tangent. So tangent of 40, the opposite goes on the top of the ratio for the fraction there, and adjacent goes on the bottom. Now, if the variable's in the top here, we just need to get this 9 away from it. So I would multiply both sides by 9. So I'm going to type 9 times tangent of 40 into my calculator, and whatever you get for that, that's going to be B. All right, let's scooch this up here. Let's see. 4 and 5 are both similar problems, but we're going to find an angle instead of a side. So here's my angle. 3 is opposite the angle. 7.6 is, oh my goodness, sorry, is the hypotenuse, because it's across from the right angle there. So opposite hypotenuse is going to be sine. Now, I don't know the angle measure here, so it'd be sine of x, and the opposite is 3.0. I'm just going to go ahead and write 3, and the hypotenuse is 7.6. Now, if ever you're finding an angle measure, what we have to do to cancel out the sine is take an inverse sine. That cancels that out. And so what I'm going to type to get my answer in the calculator for my angle measurement here I just have to hit second sign. That little -1 looks like an exponent, but it's actually notation for an inverse. So you're going to hit second sign and then do 3 divided by 7.6. Don't try to use the fraction key on your calculator there. Just use 3 divided by 7.6. The calculator won't do any fractions that have decimals in them, so just hit 3 division key 7.6. All right, this guy here, trying to find x. 7 is opposite. 15 is the hypotenuse. So this guy actually is also a sine. So I'm going to do sine of x. And opposite is 7, hypotenuse is 15. So what we want to do here is pretty much the same as the last question. I've got to cancel out the sine by doing an inverse. And so x is going to be inverse sine 7 over 15 for that one. Okay. Any of these questions that don't have a picture, I'm going to try to draw a picture because that'll help us kind of figure out what we want to use in this situation. So for number 6, it says a plane takes off, and I'm not the greatest drawer in the world, so this dot's just going to be my plane. Takes off with an angle of elevation with the ground. So the ground would be a horizontal line. This is going to be my ground. Angle of elevation goes up from the horizontal. This is not drawn to scale in any way, shape, or form, but here's my plane taken off. The plane would travel along this path. So angle of elevation from the ground up here would be 14 degrees. And it says when the plane reaches an altitude or a height of 1,800 feet, what is the horizontal distance, the distance along the ground the plane has traveled? So when the plane reaches this height, I'm just going to draw a vertical line straight down to the ground. And so the plane is going to end up here. That looks terrible. That's my plane. Okay, so the height is going to be a vertical distance. So this is going to be your 1,850 feet here. What is the horizontal distance the ground covers? So the vertical distance is the 1,850. The horizontal is flat like the horizon. So they're asking us to find that side in the triangle. And so what I have here, this would be opposite. This would be adjacent. I don't have a label on the hypotenuse. Opposite adjacent is going to be tangent. So I'm going to do tangent of 14. Is equal to 1,850 opposite over adjacent, which is our x. So, excuse me, to solve this problem, variables in the denominator, these are going to trade places. My answer is going to be whatever 1,850 divided by the tangent of 14 is. All right. Now, for number 7, again, I want to try to draw a picture here. It says a wheelchair ramp is 18 feet long. So I'm just going to pretend this is my ramp here. 18 feet is the length of the ramp. So that's going to be here. If we're traveling up the ramp, that's where the 18 feet is going to go. Rises 3.5 feet. So the rise is going to be the vertical distance. So let's say the bottom of this is the ground. So this is not to scale. This is 3.5 feet for the rise. What's the angle of elevation for the ramp to the nearest degree? So up from the ground, the angle of elevation would be here. And I don't know it for this problem, so that's what I'm going to figure out. Now, what we have here, this is opposite and hypotenuse. So that's going to give us the sine. So I'm going to do sine of x. The opposite is 3.5. Over 18. These are both in feet, so I don't need to do a conversion or anything like that. And we're going to do an inverse anytime we need to find an angle measure. So for this problem, I'm going to do the inverse sine 3.5 over 18 to get that angle measurement. And then I got one more at the bottom here. It says a slide that's 8.25 feet long makes an angle of 35 degrees with the ground to the nearest tenth of a foot. How high above the ground is the top of the slide? So here's my slide, 8.25 feet long. And here I'm going to have the ground. makes an angle of 35 degrees with the ground. Again, this is not drawn to scale. To the nearest tenth of a foot, how high above the ground is the top of the slide? So this would be the top of the slide here. So how high above the ground would be there? So this is going to be opposite. The slide itself is going to be the hypotenuse. So this guy's going to be sine. Sine 35. And then the opposite is x. Hypotenuse is 8.25. If the variable's in the top, we just got to get rid of that denominator. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 8.25. So what you want to type in your calculator is 8.25 times the sine of 35 degrees. And that should be your answer.